Facebook use in a number of Western countries drops for a second month in a row. What's behind the Facebook fatigue, and what's the future for social networking? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Teymoor Nabili, and here's a question for you. Are you logging off Facebook? Because if you are, you're not alone. It appears that about 100,000 Britons did so last month alone, and that's the good news. The figures elsewhere were much worse. In the US, user numbers down by just over 6 million. In Canada, a fall of about 1.5 million users. In Russia, the numbers fell by about 100,000. But it's not all bad news, because elsewhere the numbers are a little better. Worldwide, for instance, Facebook has 687 million users. That's apparently an all-time high for the website. This is primarily because usage in countries like Brazil and Mexico are surging. So what's behind the fall in the numbers? And is Facebook heading the same way as Friendster and MySpace? Well, joining me now to discuss the questions are my guests, all from London. Charlotte McEleny is a senior reporter for the New Media Age publication. That's a trade magazine dedicated to the digital media industry. Kevin Anderson's a technology journalist, and Barry Fox is contributing editor of Europe for Consumer Electronics Daily. Thank you all for being with us on the programme today. Before we actually sort of begin to ask some of the questions like why should we care and what does it all mean, let's just try and get a little bit of context on there if we could, because Facebook's been presented as representing the best and the worst of many things across the digital spectrum. It seems to be simultaneously the future of media and the saviour of global democracy. And on the other hand, it's a tool for spying by governments and terrorists and the biggest threat to our personal privacy that we've ever seen. These are a number of issues that we'll have to touch on. But Barry, let me begin with you and ask, first, let's just get the basics out of the way. Let's crunch the numbers on this. Because while these numbers say that Facebook numbers are falling in the Western world, Facebook itself has actually told the BBC something completely different. Let me just tell you what they're quoting. Facebook says 21% growth for US users during May, 368,000 new recruits in the UK alone between February and May. What exactly is going on?
Well, frankly, statistics, you can use them to prove whatever you like. But I think it's pretty clear that some people are beginning to wake up to the fact that using Facebook is risky, because you're giving away so much private information about yourself that you're giving it to a large number of people all around the world. You're giving information that you certainly wouldn't give to somebody if they came up and stopped you in the street.
All right.
So in terms of numbers, I really don't think the numbers matter. I think it's general common sense looks at this and say that the internet is very faddish and people will be moving on to something else, for instance, to Twitter.
Charlotte, your research and your information, does that tell you that there is Facebook fatigue out there, or is this just the ebb and flow of normal business?
It's difficult to say at this stage, I'd say. I think, as we've seen sort of MySpace and other social networks go down, there is the, are we seeing the same thing with Facebook? But I wouldn't say that you've got people like Twitter coming up high enough to be able to take away from its users yet. I mean, aspects such as privacy are starting to affect people now, perhaps switching off, but I think it's too early to say. I mean, another reason these stats might be coming up is because of mobile use. People might be switching off from using it on their desktop and instead using it on their mobile, which might show up in the statistics as well. I think it's too early to say.
And Kevin, there is another aspect to this as well, and one that Facebook have pointed out, and that is that the average usage per person seems to be actually increasing. So people who do use it are becoming more embedded with it.
Well, just to put those numbers in comparison, from U.S. statistics, recent statistics, the average user on Facebook spends about 7 hours a month on Facebook. Now, if you compare that to a local newspaper and website in the United States, they spend on average about 12 minutes a month on a U.S. newspaper website. So it's a huge gulf between the amount of time people are spending on Facebook versus the amount of time they spend on maybe some other content websites. But, some of that's just skewed because there are some, Facebook has a number of active users, but then they also have, a a small core of obsessive users who are on it literally several hours a day. I know my niece visited me last summer here in London, and even though she was on holiday, she still managed to spend about 2 to 3 hours a day on Facebook.
And in many ways, that's an extremely scary aspect of the entire internet phenomenon. And I see Barry laughing already. But Barry, before we talk about how the youth have changed from your day and mine, let me just come back to one point that you made, and that's the faddishness aspect of the whole thing. Now, we saw Friendster come and go. We saw MySpace come and go. Well, they haven't gone per se, but they do seem to be dinosaurs in this current environment. Is Facebook, just by the very nature of the medium, destined to go the same way?
Well, obviously, I can't say. I can only tell you my hunch is that yes. I mean, as you can see, I'm not exactly young. I've seen all this happen a few times. I mean, when I was young, it was pen pals. You wrote letters to people, and then we went on to. I was one of the first people, I think, probably here to use email with the telecom gold in this country. Then that became a bit of a fad. So email became big. We had fax as well, and Citizens Band Radio, CB radio. Do you remember all that? With 10-4, people talking to each other. It's a way to fill time. And one of the words, if you look at the forums about this, the word that keeps coming up is "get a life." And when you mention about somebody coming to London and spending their time on Facebook, it reminds me of when I was touring Japan with a press trip. We were on a coach, and they showed us videos of the countryside on the screen in the coach instead of looking out of the window. Now, that to me is a lot of what Facebook is about.
Kevin, no offence to your niece who's come over and spent her time on Facebook, but I mean, there's a point there, isn't there? At the end of the day, this stuff, your niece will also grow up and forget about it, presumably, and maybe even find something new to touch upon, won't she?
Well, I think, in terms of the Facebook demographic, the average age is sort of the mid-20s, and that's when, connecting with friends, socializing, making sure that you're at the right parties is incredibly important. And as people grow older, their lives become busier and they use the internet for other things. I mean, that's the interesting difference between Twitter and Facebook, is that, ironically, Twitter users tend to be a bit older, and the average age being in the early 30s. So some people, in terms of Twitter, are actually using it because chat, instant messaging is blocked in a lot of offices. They'll often use Twitter because it's much more difficult to block Twitter. So it's an interesting way to look at how these things are being used. I think one of the issues with Facebook is it's become the cannibal of social networks. I mean, whenever there's a new feature that comes along, location or coupons or even updates, which started on Twitter and then were absorbed into Facebook, Facebook has just kind of cannibalized all of these other features. So it is kind of maybe a black hole of social networking features.
But look, there was that incident not so very long ago, in fact very, very recently, in which Apple, Charlotte, let me put this to you, Apple decided that they were going to integrate Twitter much more closely into their new operating system than Facebook. It seems that love affair ended quite quickly. Is that perhaps an indicator of the future?
Perhaps. I mean, I think the thing about Twitter is that it's very much about this real-time interaction, and Facebook is sort of innovating that way, but it's not quite sort of moved as quickly on that, I don't think. So I think for the use of the mobile, Twitter suits it a lot closely. And perhaps that's where people are migrating. Maybe Facebook isn't fast enough. Maybe it is for those personal conversations, and actually for sharing information and getting information, it's Twitter that they need to use. All
right, Kevin, let me come back to something that you brought up at the beginning, and that is the privacy issue. I think it was you that mentioned it. The Electronic Privacy Information Centre and a handful of other organisations dedicated to the idea of privacy have filed a lawsuit now against Facebook, and they're wondering whether the Federal Trade Commission should force Facebook to abandon one of those apps that you just said is voraciously incorporating, and that is the facial recognition. But that's just the tip of the larger iceberg, isn't it? I mean, Facebook, right the way throughout its history, has proven to be a somewhat obnoxiously intrusive sort of application and program, and raised a lot of questions about these issues. Expand on what's going on here and whether we should be scared of this.
Well, there are two issues, and I think one issue with Facebook is the shifting ground in terms of privacy. So they changed the settings, and proponents of Facebook will say that you can manage your privacy settings in Facebook very granularly. You can change your settings on who sees the information that is available to them. However, and Facebook has run into issues just north of the U.S. border in Canada, where it tends to be opt-out instead of opt-in on a lot of new features. So Facebook makes you choose not to use something rather than asking you first and giving you the choice whether to use it. And they've run into a number of countries, run into an issue in a number of countries in terms of that opt-out or opt-in. So that is definitely something that has been an issue. I think the other thing, though, is, occasionally a story will come into the press showing people how much information they are sharing and what that information can be used for. And I think in some ways, there are definitely issues in terms of, especially between jurisdictions, on how Facebook treats privacy. But there are also issues in terms of educating users. I mean, when it comes to computer security, a lot of security experts will say the problem exists between the keyboard and the chair. The problem is us. And that we're revealing this information voluntarily. And sometimes when you confront users with how much information they are sharing on Facebook or any one of these networks, they're quite shocked.
But I mean, I see both Charlotte and Barry nodding there. Barry, is the problem us? Because at the end of the day, Kevin's absolutely right. But then corporations are not entirely benign in all of this.
Well, yes, the problem is us. I really feel that very strongly, and I think education is the key, and it's the point I always keep coming back to. People are incredibly dumb, dare I say stupid, when it comes to using these social network sites. I mean, they give out extraordinary amounts of personal information. I mean, down to the fact they're going on holiday, effectively saying, my house is going to be empty for 2 weeks, come burglarize it if you want to. And people post pictures of them doing stupid things. I mean, I know personal experience that people have posted pictures that they really would not want somebody else to see.
Right.
Yet they put it there for the whole world to see, and it stays there forever. Because even if it comes off the Facebook, somebody could grab that picture, and that's death to future employment. It can also be death to marriages too. It's really incredible what people post.
You're absolutely right, and I can't remember who it was that said something along the lines of nobody ever lost money by underestimating the intelligence of the average population. However, like I say, no one ever probably lost any money either at underestimating the deviousness of corporations and governments too. And surely they have a part to play in this. Charlotte, it wasn't too long ago, and I'm struggling to remember now, but there was an incident, I think it was Microsoft, in one of their applications where they had in their terms and of agreement contract that everyone appends to all of these things, there was a clause in it that said anything that you put in your emails through this service becomes the property of Microsoft, which in essence gave them copyright over anything that you might send, whether it be an image, a photograph, or some kind of a trademarked device. And they were forced to take it out. And again, I forget the details, but things like that have happened. And corporations and governments are not entirely innocent in all of this, are they?
No, absolutely not. But I think there's a sort of a value exchange, because I think the thing with Facebook that's different from social networks and things that have gone before is that you use it because it's your real friends, because you use your details, people know it's you, and that makes it quite a useful service. That's why in the UK there's 27 million people using it. MySpace never got that big, and that's because of the reason that it's really you, it's really your mum, it's really your best friends, things like that. So I think there is a value exchange. Yes, Facebook has a responsibility to let you know when new things are coming up. Like we talked about the opt-in, opt-out. It should all be opt-in, I think. But at the same time, we need to understand that it's opt-in. We should be teaching ourselves, or maybe Facebook should be teaching us a little bit more about how to change our privacy settings.
Barry, I just want to keep this theme going for just a second, because at this time we have the unprecedented developments going on in the Middle East, and part of that has been the suggestion amongst a lot of people that Facebook and Twitter and some of these social media have played an important part in bringing people together and allowing them to express what has been portrayed as a democratic right. But we at this station, for instance, have been very much aware and occasionally a little bit fooled by the fact that a lot of the information that we get through the social media is not just innocent people exchanging information. It's much more sinister than that in a lot of ways. I mean, does Facebook itself have a role to play in any of this?
Well, you have to be suspicious of what you read. I mean, in the early days of the internet, it was just a mad jungle. I mean, it was Google that made it kind of usable, but you've got sites like Wikipedia, which will put warnings up saying, this is, we're publishing these facts, but they need checking. People tend to imagine that, first of all, if they read it in the newspapers, it must be true. Then people got wise to the fact it didn't have to be true. If you're reading on the internet, it probably isn't true. And if you read it on a site like Facebook, then it may well be something that somebody said in the spur of the moment, or when they were perhaps had a few drinks. And you have to remember, basically, yes, it is available only to friends, but friends fall out. And once something goes on the internet, it is there forever. Once it's out, it's out. You can never get it back. And education is the key. People should be taught that at school. Along with the ability to type on a keyboard without looking at the keyboard, they should be taught, once you type something or post a picture, it is there forever. Yeah. And I mean ever.
All right. Well, let me just highlight another of the slightly more sinister elements of this, because there's also a psychological process behind all of this, because a study by researchers at Edinburgh's Napier University has come out, and they say that Facebook, in many ways, is like gambling. And I'll quote, they say, Facebook keeps users in a neurotic limbo, not knowing whether they should hang on in there just in case they miss out on something good. And according to the research as well, this in turn leads to user anxiety. The study says that 12% of users say Facebook makes them anxious. 63% didn't immediately respond to friends' requests. 32% say rejecting a friend's requests led to the feeling of guilt and discomfort. And 10% have admitted disliking receiving friends' requests. And Charlotte, just on an anecdotal level, I know a number of people with children who have said that Facebook has been a very effective tool for bullying children at school. The ability to ostracize and gang up on people is magnified by this whole process. I mean, there are dark elements here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that the government is trying to work towards. They are trying to figure out schemes of how you manage this, because the problem is then who is the blame on, or who has to manage this? Is it the parents? Is it the schools? Is it companies like Facebook? And I think actually it's to do with all three. Parents can't monitor their kids all the time. Going back to the mobile phone thing, kids, you might be monitoring their 1 or 2 hours a day of use on the computer when they're doing their homework, but then they're sitting in their room and they've got their mobile. So how can you check that they're not, on Facebook then? So it's quite difficult. And then, you can't monitor that. Maybe they're not telling you. It's quite a difficult a balance to get, because the access is so easy.
Kevin, is there anything at government level that you've seen that might in some way mitigate, modify, change the nature of Facebook and the kind of social media that we're seeing? Are governments beginning to respond to some of these concerns?
Yes, actually in South Korea now, to post a comment on a forum, you need to enter your national ID number. So there are some governments that are confronting this quite directly. And South Korea is an interesting sort of experimental place, because the broadband there is almost faster than any place else in the world, and the internet use is high. And you've had issues with internet addiction over the years, and so you've got internet addiction treatment centers. Interestingly enough, one of the most popular social networks in South Korea is a kind of a virtual world called Psy World, and that's most of the people who use that are actually South Korean housewives. So I mean, it's a really interesting place, and they are dealing with some of these issues in a way that a lot of other places are watching.
All right, well, let's try and turn it to more positive elements like that. Barry, let me ask you. I mean, what exactly do you think that social media has contributed to the digital world, and what's, I guess, the future development of this path?
Well, I mean, it's a terrific way for families who are split up across the world to keep together. I mean, it is a wonderful communication tool. If you're talking about, showing the pictures of the kids, or this is where I went. I mean, where it sort of kind of starts to break down is when people have got just nothing better to do than saying I don't feel very well today, or I'm going out later, or I don't know what to do. I mean, that's, the only one I think of is pathetic, and it really is get a life. These are, with all technology and all developments, there is always an upside and a downside. Governments, we talk about legislation. I mean, that's a great idea, Korea, enter the ID number. But somebody who wants to get round a system will always be able to get round it. And I think we're making a mistake if we work on the principle that it's up to governments. It's up to mummy and daddy in government to do it. It's not, actually. It's up to mummy and daddy at home to make sure that kids aren't locked away in their rooms, whether they're on a computer or on a mobile. And it's up to those parents not to think, gosh, isn't it great, little Jenny, little Johnny is quiet for a few hours. I mean, there's some nasty stuff on the internet, and parents need to look over the shoulders. In other words, computer should be in the living room where there's the feeling that mum and dad may see what you're watching.
All right, well, now I've got you three on, and you're all very much plugged into the digital world and the way trends are going. So in our last couple of minutes, let me just ask you to speculate a little bit upon where we might end up. I mean, we started up saying that Facebook is losing business, but if it does lose business, let's just pretend that Facebook may be waning a little. Charlotte, what is on your radar out there that may be the next thing?
I think if Facebook wanes, then it will be perhaps because it's getting too broad. I think when we talk about people's nieces and things like that on Facebook, I think a lot of reasons for them for logging off may be the fact that their mum's on there now and things like that. So perhaps you'll see a return to sort of slightly more niche networks, so for particular age groups or for particular interest groups, or networks that are really open like Twitter, and it's all about sort of sharing content and things like that rather than communicating.
Kevin, obviously a lot of people are going to be looking very closely at these numbers, I think, because Facebook is probably on the verge of a public listing on the stock market, and many people are hoping that it's going to make them an awful lot of money. So numbers like this are going to disturb them a little bit. Do you think that the overall trend that you're seeing, the movement of the terrain in the digital world, is moving somewhere in a slightly different direction, or has Facebook really still got its finger on the pulse?
Well, I think, to put this in context, Facebook is still seeing quite dramatic growth, as you say, in those heavily populated developing countries, Mexico, Brazil, India. And so I think that's one of the things that we're really seeing is that, if you would have said last year that Indonesia was the fastest growing user of Facebook, I think a lot of people would have scratched their heads because they see it as a largely Western activity. They don't see it as an activity in some of these other countries. Now, one of the points that the analysts made about these figures yesterday is Facebook has always said they want to hit that 1 billion mark, that's their goal. And they speculated as to whether or not Facebook would enter China. Now, the history of Western internet companies entering China is littered with defeat and humiliation. Yahoo, Google, everybody who's gone into China from the West has had a really rough time and largely been eclipsed by domestic competitors in China. So there's a real question as to whether that'll happen, especially as you put earlier before with the political events in the Middle East, whether the Chinese government would even look fondly on such a move. I'm
still, though, looking for a name, if anything, or an app or an idea as to what might replace it, Barry. I mean, just something that'll give us the next phase of digital world. What do you think?
Gosh, it would be nice to think that we might go back to actually writing coherent sentences and trying to write something entertaining rather than something trivial. And it just might be that people would start using these sites to do something creative rather than tell you what they had for tea or what they would like to have for breakfast tomorrow.
I echo that sentiment wholeheartedly, Barry, and I'm going to head off now and find something to do, not more interesting than this, because this has been very interesting, but something that doesn't involve social media. So that's about the end of our show, and I'd like to thank all of you, my guests, Charlotte McEleny, Kevin Anderson and Barry Fox, joining us all from London. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome your comments or suggestions on this programme, so do email us, insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for the moment, it's goodbye.